Gulf County Sheriff's investigators are releasing more details about a murder-suicide.
Jennifer and Brandon Sheffield were married and living in Brandon, Mississippi.
My husband is being incredible, though.
Jennifer woke up in a house filled with unfinished plans, unread messages, and the ordinary noise of a life still in motion. Nothing about that morning suggested that strangers across the country would soon learn her name. She was thinking about exams, children, errands, and the 1,000 invisible responsibilities that keep a family running. Somewhere between routine and hope, Jennifer was still imagining a future she believed she had time to build. Jennifer Sheffield was 30 years old when her life ended in Brandon, Mississippi, a growing city east of Jackson, known for quiet subdivisions, school traffic, church communities, and the kind of neighborhoods where people wave from driveways. It was the kind of place where tragedies feel impossible until they happen in the house next door. To people who knew her, yet Jennifer was more than the headlines that would later reduce her to a single terrible event. She was a mother, a student, a wife in transition, and a woman trying to reshape her life while carrying the weight of everyone else's needs. Friends described her as intelligent, driven, and warm. She had the kind of energy that made busy look effortless, even when it wasn't. There are people who move through life loudly, announcing every accomplishment. Jennifer, by most accounts, was not one of them. She simply kept going. She was studying to become a doctor, according to multiple reports after her death. That detail matters because it says something essential about who she was. Medical school is not a casual dream. It requires discipline, sacrifice, years of delayed gratification, and a willingness to keep working when most people would stop. Jennifer had chosen a path built on endurance. Somewhere inside her was a belief that she could become more than what the present moment demanded, and the present demanded a lot. She was raising children. Reports indicated that she and Brandon Sheffield shared daughters, young lives who depended on routines, tenderness, meals, schedules, and emotional steadiness. Motherhood often disappears in public narratives, flattened into one word. But in reality, it is made of hundreds of private acts: tying shoes, remembering appointments, checking homework, calming fears at bedtime, pretending to be less tired than you are. Jennifer lived inside those acts. People close to her said she loved her children deeply. That, too, sounds simple until you understand what it means in practice. Love is showing up when you are exhausted. Love is thinking about someone else while planning your own future. Love is trying to protect children from adult pain they cannot understand. By late 2024, Jennifer's life appeared to be divided between what she had built and what she was trying to leave behind. Publicly, there were signs of normalcy. Social media often functions as a stage where people present the version of life they hope is true, or want others to believe is true. In one post, Jennifer praised her husband as a devoted father and wonderful spouse. Those words would later be replayed with heartbreaking irony. But anyone who has lived through difficulty knows this truth. A public compliment does not always reflect a private reality. Sometimes it reflects hope, sometimes denial, sometimes survival. Behind closed doors, reports later indicated that Jennifer and Brandon had begun divorce proceedings. That detail reframes everything. Divorce is not just paperwork. It is emotional geography changing in real time. Shared rooms become contested spaces. Familiar routines become negotiations. Every conversation can feel loaded with history. Every silence can feel like warning. For Jennifer, the divorce may have represented something more than the end of a marriage. It may have represented a reclaiming of identity. She was only 30, young enough to begin again, old enough to know that beginnings often come disguised as endings. Friends reportedly said she had dreams, goals, and momentum. She was working toward medicine. She was raising daughters. She was navigating separation. And the combination suggests a woman carrying enormous pressure while still reaching forward. There is a tendency after tragedy to imagine that people sensed what was coming. Usually, they didn't. Usually, life continues in fragments of normalcy. Groceries bought, laundry folded, texts unanswered until later, coffee reheated twice and never finished. Jennifer's final days were likely filled with practical concerns rather than dramatic foreshadowing. That is what makes cases like hers so devastating. The person at the center of the story is not someone walking through ominous music toward fate. She was a real woman with tasks to complete. She may have been worrying about deadlines, finances, co-parenting, housing, custody, grades, the next week, the next month. She may have been thinking about how to build peace after conflict, and she may have believed the hardest part was already behind her. Brandon, Mississippi moved through the final week of December as towns do after Christmas. Decorations still hung on porches, children were home from school, families were preparing for the new year. Inside many homes there was clutter from celebrations, leftovers in refrigerators, plans for January. Inside Jennifer's home, another kind of transition was unfolding. No outsider can fully know the private emotional weather of a marriage nearing its end. But statistics and experience tell us that separation can be one of the most dangerous times in an abusive or controlling relationship. It is the moment when one person realizes they are losing access, authority, image, or control. Even in relationships without documented violence, the act of leaving can trigger volatility. Whether Jennifer felt fear, relief, uncertainty, or all three at once is known only to those closest to her. What is known is that she was moving toward change. And change requires courage. It takes courage to admit something is broken, courage to disappoint expectations, courage to imagine a future different from the one you promised years earlier, courage to keep studying, keep parenting, keep functioning while your private life is unraveling. Jennifer appears to have been doing exactly that. Then came the morning of December 28th, 2024. Phone calls reportedly went unanswered. Concern began to build. Something inside the Sheffield home had gone terribly wrong. The woman who had spent her life carrying responsibilities, planning ahead, and caring for others was suddenly unreachable. Before police entered that house, before investigators spoke, before the public knew anything at all, Jennifer's story had already split into two parts: the life she was building, and the violence waiting just beyond the next closed door. Before Brandon Sheffield became the center of a homicide investigation, he was known in a far more ordinary role: husband, father, neighbor, familiar face in a quiet Mississippi community. That is often how these stories begin, not with a monster recognized by everyone around him, but with a person whose danger remained hidden, minimized or misunderstood until it was too late. Brandon Sheffield was 40 years old in December 2024. He lived in Brandon, Mississippi with Jennifer Sheffield and their children in what outwardly appeared to be a stable family home. The city itself was the kind of place where reputation matters. Churches, schools, youth sports, and community ties create an atmosphere where people know one another by name, or at least by association. In environments like that, appearances can become a shield. Public records and news reporting after the deaths did not reveal an extensive criminal history or a dramatic trail of arrests that would have made him immediately recognizable as a future killer. That absence is important. Many perpetrators of domestic homicide do not arrive with neon warning signs visible to the public. Some maintain jobs, raise children, socialize normally, and function convincingly in daily life. The violence often lives in private spaces. Little officially documented information was released about Brandon's childhood, upbringing, or mental health history. Responsible reporting requires honesty about what is known and what is not. There were no widely published court records detailing diagnosed psychiatric conditions or histories of severe institutional treatment at the time of coverage. What exists instead are the circumstances surrounding the final months of his marriage, and those circumstances can reveal motive more clearly than biography. By late 2024, Brandon's marriage to Jennifer was reportedly ending. Multiple news outlets stated that the couple had begun the divorce process. That phrase can sound administrative, almost sterile. In reality, divorce can threaten identity, finances, access to children, housing, social standing, and emotional control. For some people, it is painful but manageable. For others, especially individuals who equate possession with love, it can become intolerable. Domestic violence experts have long identified separation as one of the most dangerous periods in an unhealthy relationship. When one partner chooses independence, the other may experience not sadness alone, but humiliation, rage, panic, or a perceived collapse of power. The relationship is no longer theirs to define. Decisions are being made without them. Boundaries are forming where unrestricted access once existed. If Brandon struggled with control, abandonment, jealousy, or entitlement, divorce may have represented far more than a breakup. It may have felt like defeat. And defeat can be combustible in the wrong mind. To outsiders, he may still have appeared normal. Many people later ask the same question after crimes like this. Didn't anyone know? But that question misunderstands how often coercive personalities operate, and they compartmentalize. They can be attentive parents in public, cordial neighbors in passing, calm during routine interactions, and deeply volatile behind closed doors. Their image management becomes part of their power. Jennifer's public praise of Brandon just weeks before her death, calling him a devoted father and wonderful husband, was widely cited after the tragedy. Some saw it as evidence that no one could have predicted what happened, but public compliments inside strained relationships can mean many things. They can reflect habit, hope, conflict avoidance, image protection, or a complicated emotional bond. They do not erase private turmoil. By the final weeks of December, the Sheffields were reportedly living in the shadow of divorce proceedings. That means lawyers, documents, conversations about property, parenting schedules, future plans. It means the architecture of a shared life was being dismantled piece by piece. For Jennifer, that process may have symbolized liberation. For Brandon, it may have symbolized loss. Those two experiences can exist inside the same house at the same time. There is no verified public record of a final argument or a single triggering event immediately before the killings. Often, there isn't one. People search for dramatic catalysts because they are easier to understand than slow-building resentment. But many domestic murders are not caused by one argument. They are caused by months or years of grievance, insecurity, control, and the refusal to accept another person's autonomy. If Brandon had been watching Jennifer move forward, pursuing medical ambitions, caring for their daughters, preparing for a future beyond the marriage, that contrast may have sharpened whatever anger or desperation he carried. Her progress could have mirrored his stagnation. Her independence could have exposed his irrelevance. Again, motive must be framed carefully. Only Brandon knew his internal reasoning, and he died before facing questioning or trial. But the known facts strongly suggest the separation was central to what followed. There is another pattern common in murder-suicide cases. The perpetrator often sees family members not as independent human beings, but as extensions of self. If they cannot maintain the family on their terms, they choose destruction over loss. It is not an act of love. It is the final expression of ownership. Some killers spend days fantasizing. Others make sudden decisions during emotional collapse. Some vacillate between reconciliation and revenge. Without a confession or trial evidence, Brandon's precise timeline remains unknown. But what is known is chilling enough. He was inside the home with Jennifer during the final hours of her life, and when police later arrived, both were dead. That means somewhere in the hours before December 28th became a crime scene, Brandon crossed a line from troubled spouse to executioner. The home where children had lived became the setting of fatal violence. The person Jennifer once trusted became the person she needed protection from. And perhaps most haunting of all, there may have been moments beforehand that looked completely ordinary. A door closing, footsteps in a hallway, a routine exchange, silence in the kitchen, the kind of domestic details no one remembers until they become the last ones. And outside, neighbors were living through post-holiday normalcy. Inside, a private storm was reaching its end. When violence finally came, it would happen not in a dark alley or a stranger's ambush, but in the most intimate place possible: home. And by the time anyone realized Jennifer was in danger, Brandon had already decided how the story would end. The morning of December 28, 2024, began like countless others in Brandon, Mississippi. Quiet streets, winter air, homes still wrapped in the slow rhythm between Christmas and New Year's. Inside one house on a residential street, however, normal life had already ended. At some point before anyone outside understood what was happening, Jennifer Sheffield was shot and killed inside the home she shared with Brandon Sheffield. Authorities would later state that the case was an apparent murder-suicide. Brandon killed Jennifer, then turned the gun on himself. By the time police entered the residence, both were dead. The exact hour Jennifer was killed has not been publicly detailed in official reporting. That silence leaves room only for what can be responsibly said. There was no public courtroom reconstruction, no testimony under oath, no trial exhibits laying out each minute. Brandon's death meant many answers died with him, but the available facts still tell a devastating story. Jennifer was 30 years old. She was a mother, a student with dreams of becoming a doctor, and a woman reportedly in the process of divorcing her husband. Somewhere in the final stretch of that marriage, she lost the chance to build the future she had been working toward. What happened inside the home before the shooting is unknown to the public. There may have been an argument. There may have been pleading, silence, denial, or fear. There may have been no warning at all. Domestic homicides do not always arrive with loud escalation. Sometimes they happen in moments so sudden that the victim has almost no time to process what is unfolding. What is known is that Jennifer was found dead from gunshot wounds, and Brandon was found dead nearby from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, according to investigators cited in multiple news reports. That detail matters because it reveals the final cruelty of many murder-suicides. The perpetrator makes a unilateral decision not only about their own life, but about someone else's. Jennifer was denied choice, denied voice, denied tomorrow. Then came the silence. Few phone calls reportedly began going unanswered. Concern grew. In many cases like this, the first signal that something is wrong is not dramatic. It is absence, a missed text, a mother who does not reply, a friend who cannot reach someone. Routine interrupted. For Jennifer's loved ones, those unanswered calls likely felt confusing before they felt terrifying. People explain away silence at first. Maybe she was sleeping. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her phone battery died. Human beings instinctively reach for ordinary explanations because the alternative is too painful. But as time passed, concern deepened enough for authorities to respond. When deputies or officers arrived at the Sheffield home, they encountered a locked residence and a scene no family should ever have to imagine. Inside, Jennifer and Brandon were both deceased, and the house that once contained children's voices, schedules, arguments, reconciliation attempts, meals, future plans, and private family history had become a crime scene. Investigators began the careful process that follows every suspicious death, securing the area, documenting evidence, recovering the weapon, determining trajectories, identifying timelines, contacting next of kin. Even when the broad outline seems obvious, procedure matters. Every photograph, shell casing, wound analysis, and witness statement becomes part of the permanent record. For those outside law enforcement, such scenes are often reduced to a sentence in the news: woman found dead in apparent murder-suicide. But behind that sentence is the emotional wreckage of dozens of people. Parents receiving calls, children facing a reality they cannot yet comprehend. Friends refreshing phones in disbelief. Officers carrying images they did not ask to see. Community reaction was swift and deeply emotional. Neighbors and acquaintances described shock. Many who knew Jennifer reportedly focused on her warmth, intelligence, and devotion to her children. Others struggled to reconcile public perceptions of the couple with the violence now attached to their names. This is common after domestic killings. Communities ask how something so catastrophic could remain hidden behind normal appearances. The answer is often that abuse, resentment, coercion, or despair can remain invisible until the final act. News coverage soon revealed an especially painful detail. Jennifer and Brandon had reportedly begun the divorce process. That fact changed how many people understood the killings, and Jennifer had not been trapped in permanence. She was trying to leave. She was trying to change the shape of her life. And then she was killed. For advocates who study domestic violence, the pattern was tragically familiar. Separation is a high-risk period. The moment one partner asserts independence can provoke the most dangerous response from someone who views that independence as betrayal. Jennifer's death became more than an isolated tragedy. It became a part of a larger national pattern in which women are killed by intimate partners during or after attempts to leave relationships. Yet statistics never capture the personal cost. Somewhere, children lost their mother in an act of violence and their father in the act that followed. Extended family members lost not one future, but several. Jennifer's dreams ended. Her daughter's sense of safety was permanently altered. Parents and friends were left with questions no investigation could fully answer. Police continued processing the scene and gathering statements in the immediate aftermath. Though authorities identified it as an apparent murder-suicide, they still had to establish sequence, confirm identities, notify relatives, and release information responsibly. Meanwhile, the public began assembling the fragments available online: social media posts, smiling photographs, references to Jennifer's studies, comments about family life. As often happens, people discovered that only weeks earlier, Jennifer had publicly praised Brandon. That contrast between affectionate words and fatal violence stunned many observers. But relationships in crisis are rarely simple from the inside. The most haunting part of December 28th may be how ordinary it likely looked from the street. No alarms, no public struggle, no visible warning to neighbors walking dogs or loading groceries into cars. Behind one front door, a woman's life ended while the world outside continued unaware. By nightfall, Jennifer's name had entered local headlines. Investigators had their likely conclusion. But for those who loved her, the real mystery had only begun. How had a woman trying to build a better future ended up dead in the place she was supposed to be safest? In many homicide cases, Part 4 is where the story accelerates. Detectives chase leads. Suspects lie under interrogation lights. Juries listen to evidence, and justice arrives in the form of a verdict. But Jennifer Sheffield's case followed a darker and more frustrating path. The man investigators believed killed her was already dead when police arrived. There would be no dramatic arrest, no televised perp walk, no cross-examination, no sentence read aloud in court. For Jennifer's family, that absence created its own kind of punishment. When officers entered the Sheffield home on December 28, 2024, they reportedly found Jennifer dead from gunshot wounds and Brandon Sheffield dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Based on the physical evidence at the scene, investigators classified the case as an apparent murder-suicide. That conclusion likely relied on scene reconstruction, firearm placement, wound analysis, and the totality of circumstances. Those details are standard in death investigations, but emotionally they mean something devastating. Law enforcement can determine what happened, yet still be unable to deliver the traditional form of justice many families expect. There was no fugitive to hunt, no suspect to pressure, no trial date to anticipate, no possibility of Jennifer's loved ones looking the killer in the eye and hearing him answer for what he did. Instead, the investigation became a search not for who, but for why. Authorities would have processed the home thoroughly, photographing each room, collecting shell casings, documenting blood evidence, recovering the weapon, tracing ownership, confirming fingerprints, and examining timelines through phones or digital records where available. Even when the likely perpetrator is deceased, procedure matters. Official certainty must be built on evidence, not assumption. Investigators also had to determine whether anyone else was involved, whether children were present or elsewhere, whether prior calls for service existed, and whether there were warning signs that had gone unnoticed. Domestic homicide reviews often examine these questions later to identify prevention failures. As news spread, another crucial detail emerged. Jennifer and Brandon had reportedly started the divorce process before the killings. That information changed public understanding of the case almost immediately. What initially looked like a sudden household tragedy began to resemble something more specific and tragically common: intimate partner violence escalating during separation. Experts have long warned that the period when one partner attempts to leave can be the most dangerous. Control is slipping. Legal systems become involved. Finances are threatened. Social image can fracture. If the abusive or unstable partner believes they are entitled to decide the future, violence can become their final method of control. For Jennifer's family and friends, the divorce detail likely reframed memories. Conversations that once seemed routine may have felt urgent in retrospect. Moments of tension may have taken on new meaning. Questions without answers multiplied. Did Jennifer feel afraid? Had she confided concerns? Were there signs others missed? Could intervention have changed the outcome? These are the unbearable questions families often carry after domestic killings. Because Brandon died at the scene, there was no criminal prosecution. In legal terms, the case effectively ended with the death of the suspected offender. But emotionally, it did not end at all. Jennifer's loved ones still had to bury her. They still had to explain the unimaginable to children. They still had to navigate media coverage that placed her name beside the man who killed her. They still had to live with a justice system that, through no fault of investigators, could offer findings but not accountability. There is a difference between closure and conclusion. Jennifer's case reached a conclusion quickly. It did not provide closure. Public reaction grew stronger as more people learned who Jennifer was. Reports emphasized that she was studying to become a doctor and was deeply devoted to her daughters. Those details made the loss feel especially cruel. This was not simply a woman whose life ended. It was a woman in the middle of building something meaningful. Her death also ignited conversation about warning signs hidden inside seemingly stable homes. Friends reportedly described shock, saying the family appeared normal from the outside. But many abusive dynamics survive precisely because image management is part of the system. Public smiles can coexist with private fear. If there was any hunt in this case, it became a societal one. A hunt for understanding. A hunt for prevention. A hunt for ways to identify danger before police tape replaces possibility. Domestic violence advocates often note that murder-suicide cases are sometimes mislabeled as relationship tragedies, as though both parties simply fell into disaster together. That language can erase agency. Jennifer did not choose mutual destruction. She was killed. Brandon then chose to kill himself. Those are distinct acts with one responsible party. Naming that truth matters. It restores Jennifer's personhood. It rejects narratives that blur accountability. It reminds the public that homicide followed by suicide is not romance, despair, or fate. It is violence. In the months after the case, there would be no courtroom testimony from Brandon, no plea, no explanation. Families in these situations are often left piecing together motive from fragments: texts, legal filings, financial strain, emotional patterns, prior arguments, comments made to friends. Sometimes the evidence explains mechanics, but never motive. Sometimes the most complete answer is also the simplest. He believed he had the right, and that belief is the root of many domestic killings. Jennifer's family, meanwhile, had to honor her life while carrying the burden of how it ended. Grief after homicide differs from other grief. It often includes trauma, anger, intrusive images, a legal frustration, media intrusion, and the knowledge that the death was intentional. Even memorializing the person can become complicated. Loved ones must fight to keep the victim's identity larger than the crime. So, justice in Jennifer's case could never be measured by prison years or verdict forms. Brandon escaped earthly punishment the moment he turned the weapon on himself. But another kind of justice remains possible. Speaking Jennifer's name, telling the truth about what happened, using her story to warn others, recognizing separation as a danger point, believing women when they say they need help, understanding that homes can hide violence more effectively than strangers. The state could close a file. The family could not. And somewhere beyond official reports and headlines, the most important judgment was already clear. Jennifer had done nothing that justified what was done to her. When the cameras leave, when the headlines sink beneath newer tragedies, and when public attention moves on, families are left standing in the silence. That is where Jennifer Sheffield's story truly continues. Not in articles, not in police summaries, but in the private lives of the people who loved her and had to keep living after she was gone. For Jennifer's children, the loss was layered and immediate. Reports indicated she left behind daughters, young lives forced into a reality no child should ever face. In a single event, they lost their mother to violence and their father to the act that followed. Children who endure trauma like that often grow up carrying questions adults cannot answer. Why did this happen? And could it have been stopped? Did my mother know? Did she suffer? Was I loved enough? The last question matters most. And in Jennifer's case, the answer appears clear from every public description. Yes, she was remembered as devoted to her daughters, ambitious for her future, and deeply engaged in the responsibilities of motherhood. Those are not small things. They are the architecture of memory children hold on to later. Packed lunches, hugs before school, corrected homework, the tone of a voice saying their names, the feeling that someone in the world was committed to their well-being. Jennifer's family was also left to grieve in a uniquely painful way. Natural death often gives mourners sadness. Violent death adds shock. Domestic homicide adds betrayal. The person who should have been part of the safety net becomes the source of destruction. That inversion can fracture trust for generations. Parents who lose daughters in cases like this often describe living in two timelines at once, the present reality of grief, and the alternate life that should have happened. In Jennifer's alternate life, she may have completed medical training. She may have watched her daughters graduate. She may have built a new home, a new relationship, a new chapter defined not by fear, but by peace. Those possibilities did not die naturally. They were taken. Communities also absorb wounds from intimate partner killings, even when they happen behind closed doors. Brandon, Mississippi, like many suburban towns, likely saw itself as ordinary and safe, and cases like Jennifer's force communities to confront an uncomfortable truth. Danger does not always come from strangers in dark parking lots. Sometimes it lives in familiar houses, hidden behind trimmed lawns, school pickups, and smiling photos. That realization can become useful if people are willing to learn from it. Jennifer's story highlights one of the most documented realities in domestic violence prevention. Separation can be the highest risk period. When a controlling or volatile partner realizes they are losing access, image, or power, violence can escalate quickly. That means communities, courts, friends, and families should take divorces and breakups seriously when fear is present. Threats matter. Obsession matters. Stalking matters. Access to firearms matters. Too often, Society treats relationship conflict as private until it becomes public through tragedy. Jennifer's case also exposes how misleading appearances can be. Public compliments, family photos, and polished social media posts do not disprove suffering. Many people remain in painful relationships while trying to maintain dignity, protect children, avoid conflict, or simply survive one day at a time. Outsiders should be cautious about assuming happiness based on curated glimpses. As for Brandon Sheffield, there is no prison update, no appeal, no parole board, no aging offender behind bars reflecting on his crimes. He died at the scene after police say he killed Jennifer. Some perpetrators see suicide as escape from consequences, shame, exposure, or punishment. But death is not accountability. And it spares the offender the long process survivors must endure. That leaves society with a difficult moral reality. Some killers never face a courtroom. When that happens, memory becomes a form of justice. Speaking Jennifer's name matters. Telling the truth about the dynamics that often precede these killings matters. Refusing language that softens the crime into family tragedy or domestic dispute matters. She was not lost in an abstract tragedy. Jennifer was killed, and she was more than the way she died. She was a woman pursuing medicine, a mother raising daughters, a person balancing responsibility with hope, someone who likely believed the next chapter of life was still possible, someone whose future was active enough that it required planning. That future now belongs only to imagination. There may be people watching this story who recognize pieces of their own lives in it. A partner who cannot accept boundaries, escalating anger during separation, monitoring behavior, threats disguised as jokes, apologies followed by intimidation, fear dismissed by others as overreaction. If so, Jennifer's story should not feel distant. It should feel like a warning taken seriously. Intervention does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is documenting behavior. Sometimes it is telling trusted people the truth. Sometimes it is contacting advocates, attorneys, or police. Sometimes it is making a safety plan before announcing a separation. Sometimes it is believing someone the first time they say, "I'm scared." Jennifer cannot benefit from those lessons now. Others still can. There is also another legacy available to her daughters and loved ones, refusing to let violence define the whole story. Trauma is real, but it is not the only truth. Jennifer existed for 30 years before one man's final act. She laughed, studied, parented, hoped, and loved long before headlines reduced her life to a crime summary. That fuller life deserves attention. The public often remembers the sensational moment. Families remember the person who danced in the kitchen, worried too much, sent reminders, laughed at bad jokes, stayed up late studying, cared when exhausted, and tried again when life was difficult. That is the real memorial. If Jennifer's story changes even one conversation about domestic violence, one family's willingness to intervene, one woman's decision to seek safety, or one friend's decision to listen without judgment, then something meaningful survives the harm. But no lesson erases the loss. No awareness campaign replaces a mother. No analysis restores time. Jennifer Sheffield should have had years left to become whoever she wanted next. Her name was Jennifer Sheffield. She deserved safety, she deserved time, and she deserved the future she was building. The world is dimmer because she is gone.